Ethan Carter wiped the grease from his hands and stared at the empty street outside his tiny garage. Business had been slow. Too slow. The faded sign above his shop read, "Carter's Auto Repairs, honest work, fair price." But honesty didn't always pay the bills. The landlord had already warned him twice this month. One more missed rent payment, and the garage would be gone. Ethan sighed and glanced at the small photo taped to his toolbox. It was his wife, Lily, smiling brightly. Gone 3 years now. Cancer. Left him alone to raise their 8-year-old son, Noah. Every day Ethan fought not just to survive, but to stay strong for his boy. Just then, Noah ran out from the small room behind the garage. "Daddy! I finished my homework." Ethan forced a smile. "That's my champ." But inside, his chest felt heavy. He didn't know how he'd afford groceries this week. Across town, a sleek black luxury SUV rolled slowly down the street. It didn't belong here. Chrome wheels gleamed. Windows were tinted. The engine hummed like a dream. Inside sat billionaire entrepreneur Richard Hargrove, one of the richest men in the state. Beside him was his wife, Margaret, elegant but tired-looking. And in the back seat, their daughter, Sophie. 9 years old. Thin. Quiet. Seated in a wheelchair. Her legs lay still beneath a pink blanket. Once a bright, energetic child. Until a rare nerve illness had slowly taken away her ability to walk. Doctors had tried everything. Surgeries. Therapy. Specialists across the world. Nothing worked. Now they were headed to another expensive appointment. Another doctor. Another small hope. Suddenly, the SUV sputtered. The engine coughed. Then died. Richard slammed the steering wheel. "You've got to be kidding me." The driver quickly pulled over. Smoke puffed lightly from the hood. They had broken down. Right in front of Ethan's tiny garage. Margaret looked out the window nervously. "This place doesn't look safe." Richard scoffed. "I'm not letting some poor mechanic touch my car." But the driver said, "Sir, it's overheating badly. We won't make it anywhere else." Ethan noticed the smoke and hurried over. "Looks like a busted hose and overheated radiator," he said calmly. "I can fix it." Richard looked him up and down. Grease stains. Worn boots. Old tools. "You? Touch my vehicle?" Richard snapped. Ethan remained polite. "I won't charge much. And I'll do it right." Margaret hesitated. "Richard. Sophie's appointment." Richard sighed angrily. "Fine. But be quick." As Ethan lifted the hood, he noticed something else. In the back seat, the little girl's wheelchair had a crooked wheel. One footrest hung loose. The seat straps were uneven. Ethan frowned softly. That chair wasn't supporting her body correctly. He gently approached Margaret. "Ma'am, your daughter's wheelchair is broken." Margaret sighed sadly. "It's always breaking. We buy new ones all the time." Ethan hesitated. "I could fix it too." Richard laughed. "We can afford 100 wheelchairs. Don't waste your time." Ethan looked at Sophie. Her eyes met his. They were sad. Tired. But kind. "I'll fix it for free," Ethan said quietly. The word free caught Margaret's attention. "Why would you do that?" Ethan smiled softly. "Because kids deserve help." Richard rolled his eyes. "Do whatever you want." While fixing the car, Ethan rolled the wheelchair inside his garage. Noah watched curiously. "Daddy, is she sick?" Ethan knelt beside him. "She just needs some help standing strong." Noah smiled. "I hope she gets better." Ethan carefully worked on the chair. He straightened the seat angle, balanced the wheels, adjusted the footrests so her posture aligned better, tightened the straps to support her spine evenly. He didn't realize it, but he was correcting pressure points that had been cutting off nerve response. The same things he once learned while helping Lily through physical therapy years ago. As he worked, he talked gently to Sophie. "What's your favorite color?" "Pink," she whispered. "What's your favorite animal?" "Dolphins." Ethan smiled. "Strong swimmers. Just like you'll be strong again." Sophie smiled faintly. It was the first smile Margaret had seen in weeks. After an hour, the car was fixed. The wheelchair looked new. Ethan wheeled Sophie back outside. "Try sitting now," he said kindly. She settled into the chair. Her posture was straighter. Her shoulders relaxed. Her body felt different. "Is it comfy?" Ethan asked. Sophie nodded. "It feels better." Margaret blinked. Something in her chest stirred. Richard checked his watch impatiently. "Let's go." Ethan wiped his hands. "No charge for the wheelchair." Margaret stared at him. "Thank you," she whispered, as the SUV drove away. Sophie looked back through the window and waved. Ethan waved back. He didn't know why, but his heart felt like something big had just started. That night, Margaret helped Sophie change into pajamas. As she lifted her legs onto the bed, Sophie suddenly gasped. "Mommy." Margaret froze. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I felt something." Margaret's breath caught. "Felt what?" "My toes, they tingled." Margaret's hands began to shake. Tears filled her eyes. That hadn't happened in over a year. Margaret barely slept that night. She sat beside Sophie's bed, watching her chest rise and fall, afraid that if she blinked, the strange moment would disappear like a dream. The tingling. The feeling in her toes. It hadn't happened in over a year. Every doctor had said the same thing. Nerve damage like this rarely recovers. Prepare for permanent paralysis. But Sophie had felt something. And it happened right after that poor mechanic fixed her wheelchair. Margaret's heart raced. Could posture really make a difference? Or was it just false hope? She had learned not to hope too much. Hope hurt. The next morning, Sophie woke up smiling. "Mommy," she said softly, "my legs feel warm." Margaret rushed to her side. "Warm how?" "Like, when you sit in the sun." Margaret gently touched Sophie's feet. They weren't cold like usual. Blood flow seemed better. Color had returned to her toes. Margaret covered her mouth. "Oh my God." They dressed quickly and headed to the hospital. Richard thought it was pointless. "Margaret, we've chased miracles before." "But this is different," she insisted. She felt something. Richard sighed but agreed. At the hospital, Dr. Collins, Sophie's longtime neurologist, examined her carefully. He tested reflexes, tapped her knees, ran nerve stimulation along her legs. Usually there was nothing. No response. But this time, Sophie's foot twitched. Barely. But clearly. Dr. Collins froze. "Did you see that?" Margaret whispered urgently. "I did," he said slowly. "That's new." Richard stood up sharply. "What does that mean?" Dr. Collins adjusted his glasses. "It means there's some nerve activity returning. Very small, but real." Margaret burst into tears. "Is it possible she could walk again?" The doctor hesitated. "It's rare. Extremely rare. But, sometimes correcting posture and pressure points can restore nerve flow." Margaret thought of Ethan's careful hands adjusting the wheelchair. "Someone fixed her chair yesterday," she said. Dr. Collins raised an eyebrow. "That could absolutely play a role." Richard shook his head. "You're telling me a random mechanic did what years of specialists couldn't?" "I'm saying sometimes simple changes unlock what medicine can't," the doctor replied. News traveled fast through the Billionaire household. Private nurses whispered. Staff stared. Sophie wiggled her toes proudly. Everyone watched in amazement. Margaret couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. The way he spoke kindly. The way Sophie smiled with him. That broken little garage that somehow sparked hope. She wanted to return immediately. But Richard wasn't convinced. "It's coincidence," he said firmly. "We're not chasing fairy tales." "But Richard, we stick to professionals." Margaret fell silent. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't coincidence. Back at the garage, Ethan was struggling again. A customer argued over a small bill. Another promised to pay later. The landlord left another warning notice on the door. Ethan's stomach twisted. Noah tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, are we going to lose the garage?" Ethan knelt. "Not if I can help it, buddy." But he wasn't sure. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" A woman's voice trembled. "This is Margaret Hargrove. Sophie's mother." Ethan's heart jumped. "Is she okay?" "She moved her toes," Margaret whispered. Ethan froze. "She? What?" The doctors saw nerve response. Silence filled the line. "I think it's because of what you did to her wheelchair." Ethan swallowed. "I just fixed the balance and posture." "That may have saved my daughter," she said, breaking down. Tears poured from her voice. "Please, can we come back?" Ethan hesitated. "Your husband didn't seem happy about me helping." "I don't care," Margaret said urgently. "Please." Ethan thought of Sophie's smile. "Bring her." But Richard found out. When Margaret ordered the driver to turn back toward the garage, Richard exploded. "Absolutely not. She's improving. It's psychological. You didn't see her toes move." Richard slammed his fist. "We don't depend on poor mechanics for medical miracles." Margaret stared at him. "For once, stop caring about pride and care about our child." Silence. The car rolled on. Richard stared out the window angrily. When they arrived, Ethan rushed out. Sophie waved excitedly. "Hi, Mr. Ethan." His heart melted. "Hi, sweetheart." Margaret wheeled Sophie inside. Ethan checked the straps and posture again. Gently adjusted pressure points. He remembered the therapy techniques he once used with Lily. Small movements. Careful support. Encouraging circulation. "Can you try to wiggle your toes again?" he asked softly. Sophie concentrated. Slowly. Her toes moved. Clear. Strong. Margaret gasped loudly. "Oh my God." Richard stared, stunned. "That's impossible." Ethan smiled gently. "Your nerves just needed the right support." Sophie giggled. "I did it." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. Richard's tough expression cracked. For the first time, hope entered his eyes. But instead of gratitude, Richard's fear rose. If this poor man could help his daughter, what would people think? What would the media say? A billionaire saved by a broke mechanic? He didn't like losing control. Or credit. He cleared his throat. "This is enough for today," Richard said coldly. "We're leaving." Margaret stared at him. "But she's improving." "We'll continue with doctors." Ethan sensed tension. She needs daily posture work, he said calmly. Stopping now could slow progress. Richard's jaw tightened. I said we're leaving. Sophie's smile faded. Daddy. I want to stay. No, Richard snapped. The word cut sharply. Margaret looked torn. The driver began pushing Sophie toward the car. Sophie looked back at Ethan. Fear in her eyes. And in that moment, her foot stopped moving. Her toes went still again. Margaret noticed. Her heart dropped. Richard, it's stopping. But he refused to look back. The ride home was silent. Sophie stared at her feet, trying to wiggle her toes again. Nothing happened. The warmth she felt earlier slowly faded. Margaret noticed immediately. Her heart sank. Sweetheart, can you feel them? Sophie shook her head sadly. They feel sleepy again. Margaret closed her eyes, fighting tears. She turned to Richard. She's losing it. Richard kept his gaze forward. She's tired. That's all. But even he felt a knot form in his stomach. At the hospital later that evening, Dr. Collins ran another nerve test. No twitch. No response. The progress had stalled. Strange, he murmured. This morning we saw activity. Margaret's voice trembled. What changed? Richard stayed silent. Margaret answered softly. She stopped the posture work. Dr. Collins looked thoughtful. That could absolutely cause regression. So what do we do? Margaret asked desperately. Resume what was helping, the doctor said plainly. Margaret turned toward Richard. Her eyes burned. But he said nothing. Back at home, Sophie grew quieter. The spark in her eyes dimmed. That night she whispered. Mommy, did I do something wrong? Margaret hugged her tightly. No, baby. You did everything right. But why can't I feel my legs now? Margaret couldn't answer. Tears soaked Sophie's pillow. And Margaret made a decision. The next morning, without telling Richard, Margaret ordered the driver to take her and Sophie back to Ethan's garage. I don't care what my husband says, she whispered fiercely. I will not let my child lose hope. When they arrived, Ethan was fixing an old pickup truck. He looked shocked to see them. Is everything okay? Margaret burst into tears. She's losing the movement. Ethan's face fell. I was afraid of that. He knelt by Sophie. Let's help your body remember again. He gently readjusted the chair. Supported her legs. Encouraged small movements. Think about wiggling your toes, he whispered. Sophie concentrated hard. At first, nothing. Then slowly. A tiny twitch. Ethan smiled. There it is. Margaret gasped. Sophie laughed. I feel it again. Tears streamed down Margaret's face. It's coming back, it's really coming back. For the next hour, Ethan worked patiently. Simple movements. Gentle pressure. Encouraging posture. By the end, Sophie could slightly lift her foot. Just an inch off the footrest. Margaret covered her mouth. Oh my God. Ethan nodded softly. She's waking up nerves that have been asleep. Can she walk again? Margaret whispered. If we keep doing this daily, Ethan said carefully, there's a chance. Hope exploded in Margaret's chest. But then, a black luxury SUV screeched to a stop outside. Richard. He had tracked them. Stormed into the garage. What is going on here? Margaret froze. Richard. You went behind my back, he thundered. She was improving. You're trusting some poor man over doctors? Ethan stood calmly. Sir, I'm only helping her posture and nerve flow. Richard pointed angrily. You're filling my wife's head with false hope. Sophie cried. Daddy, please don't make me stop. But Richard wouldn't listen. We're leaving. Now. Margaret stepped in front of him. No. Silence fell. What did you say? Richard snapped. I said no, Margaret repeated firmly. For once in your life, listen to our child. She's feeling again. You care more about your image than her healing. Richard's face turned red. That's enough. Ethan gently spoke. Sir, pride can't heal a child. Love can. That sentence hit like thunder. Richard turned toward Ethan slowly. Don't you dare lecture me. But deep down, it stung because it was true. Security stepped forward. Remove him from the premises, Richard ordered. Margaret gasped. You're throwing him out? Ethan placed a calm hand on Sophie's shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart. But Sophie clung to him. Please don't go. Richard hardened. Now. The guards pulled Ethan back. Margaret screamed. Stop. Sophie sobbed loudly. I need him. Please. But the doors closed. And the SUV drove away. That night, Sophie's legs went numb again. Completely. No twitch. No warmth. No movement. The miracle was gone. Margaret broke down screaming. You did this. You stopped it. Richard stood frozen. Fear finally replacing anger. The doctor later confirmed it. Whatever was helping her has been interrupted. Margaret stared at Richard with heartbreak. She was getting better, and you destroyed it. Richard collapsed into a chair. For the first time in his life, money couldn't fix his mistake. The house was silent that night. Too silent. Sophie lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. Her legs felt cold again. Heavy. Like they no longer belonged to her. Margaret sat beside her, holding her small hand. Every few minutes she gently touched Sophie's toes. Can you feel this, sweetheart? Sophie shook her head slowly. No, Mommy. Each answer felt like a knife in Margaret's heart. Across the room, Richard stood frozen. The powerful billionaire who controlled companies and millions of dollars. Now helpless. For the first time, fear swallowed him whole. The next morning, Dr. Collins confirmed what Margaret already knew. The nerve response has disappeared again, he said gently. Margaret collapsed into the chair. So that's it, she whispered. Richard grabbed the doctor's arm. There must be something else. A surgery. A treatment. Money is not a problem. Dr. Collins sighed. Sometimes the simplest therapy works better than the most advanced medicine. Margaret looked up sharply. You mean Ethan? The doctor nodded. Yes. Whatever he was doing was helping your daughter. Richard felt his chest tighten. The poor mechanic. The man he had thrown out. The man Sophie had trusted. Guilt slammed into him like a wave. That afternoon, Margaret made a decision. She didn't ask Richard. She didn't tell the staff. She took the car herself and drove to Ethan's garage. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. She had never driven herself in years. But nothing mattered now. When she arrived, Ethan was closing the shop early. Business had been bad again. He looked surprised to see her. Mrs. Hargrove? Margaret rushed forward. Before Ethan could speak, she dropped to her knees. Right there on the oily concrete floor. Please, she sobbed. Please help my daughter. Ethan froze in shock. Ma'am, please get up. I can't, she cried. My child is losing her chance to walk. You're the only one who helped her. Tears streamed down her face. I'll do anything. People passing by stared. The proud billionaire's wife kneeling in a poor man's garage. Ethan gently lifted her up. You don't have to beg. I do, she whispered. Because I failed her by letting pride win. Ethan sighed deeply. I warned your husband stopping could hurt her progress. I know, Margaret cried. And I'll never forgive myself. Please, come back. Ethan looked away. It's not that simple. At home, Richard sat alone in Sophie's room. He stared at her in used shoes. Pink sneakers she used to love. The sight crushed him. Sophie whispered weakly. Daddy, did I lose my legs again? His throat tightened. No, sweetheart. But I can't feel them. Tears finally fell from Richard's eyes. The mighty billionaire broke. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have listened. For the first time in his life, he prayed. Not for wealth. Not for success. But for forgiveness. Back at the garage, Ethan explained softly. I'm not a doctor. I can only help with posture and therapy techniques I learned caring for my wife. I don't want to give you false hope. Margaret grabbed his hands. But you gave her real progress. Ethan hesitated. The problem is your husband doesn't trust me. I don't care anymore, Margaret said fiercely. I choose my child. Silence hung heavy. Ethan finally nodded slowly. I'll help Sophie again. Margaret burst into tears of relief. Thank you, thank you. But there's one condition, Ethan added. What? She needs consistency. Daily work. No interference. Margaret nodded eagerly. Anything. Just then, Richard arrived. He had followed Margaret. He stood frozen at the garage door watching his wife holding the poor mechanic's hands. Watching her crying. The scene crushed his pride. He walked forward slowly. Ethan looked up and stiffened. Richard swallowed hard. I was wrong. The words felt heavy. I let my pride blind me. He looked at Margaret. I'm sorry. Then he turned to Ethan. Please, help my daughter. Silence. Ethan studied him carefully. The powerful man looked broken. Not rich. Not proud. Just a father. I don't want money, Ethan said quietly. I want Sophie to have a chance. Richard nodded. You'll have anything you need. Ethan shook his head. Just trust. Richard's eyes filled. I do. For the first time. They rushed Sophie back to the garage. Ethan adjusted the wheelchair again. Carefully. Lovingly. Encouraging small movements. Try your toes, sweetheart. Sophie focused. Seconds passed. Then. A twitch. Margaret gasped. Richard froze. Another twitch. Stronger. I feel them. Sophie cried. Tears exploded everywhere. Ethan smiled softly. There you go. Within minutes, warmth returned to Sophie's legs. The miracle was back. And this time, everyone believed. From that day on, everything changed. Every morning, the black luxury SUV parked outside Ethan's tiny garage. But now, there was no arrogance. No pride. Only hope. Richard himself carried Sophie inside. Margaret watched closely, never missing a moment. Ethan worked patiently. He adjusted Sophie's posture. Encouraged gentle movements. Massaged pressure points along her spine and legs. Small steps, he always said. Your body is learning again. Sophie never complained. even when it hurt a little. "I want to walk," she whispered bravely. And everyone believed her. Days passed. Then weeks. Each day brought something new. First, Sophie could lift both feet. Then bend her knees. Then push lightly against Ethan's hands. Doctors were amazed. Dr. Collins watched in disbelief during checkups. "I've never seen recovery like this," he admitted. "The nerves are reconnecting." Richard shook his head. All because of posture therapy in a garage. "Sometimes miracles don't happen in hospitals," the doctor said gently. One afternoon, something incredible happened. Ethan placed Sophie's feet on the floor. "Let's try standing," he said softly. Margaret's heart pounded wildly. Richard held his breath. Ethan supported Sophie under her arms. "Ready?" Sophie nodded nervously. "I'm scared." "That's okay," Ethan smiled. "I'm here." Slowly, slowly. Sophie pushed down. Her legs shook. Everyone froze. Then she straightened. Standing. Not fully steady, but standing. Margaret screamed. "Oh my God! She's standing!" Richard covered his mouth, tears streaming. Ethan smiled proudly. "You're doing it, sweetheart." Sophie laughed and cried at the same time. "I'm tall." The garage erupted with joy. This was the moment no one thought would ever come. From that day forward, progress sped up. Sophie practiced every day. Holding onto chairs. Walking between Ethan and her parents. One step. Then two. Then 5. Every step felt like a miracle. Soon she walked across the garage alone. Margaret collapsed crying every time. Richard recorded every moment. Sharing it only with family. Protecting the miracle. Months later, Sophie walked into the hospital without a wheelchair. Doctors stared. Nurses cried. Patients clapped. Dr. Collins shook his head in disbelief. This will be studied for years. Richard hugged Ethan tightly. "You gave me my daughter back." Ethan smiled softly. "She did the hard part." But Ethan's life was still struggling. The garage rent was overdue. Bills stacked high. Richard noticed. One evening he said quietly, "Let me help you." Ethan hesitated. "I didn't do this for money." "I know," Richard said. "That's why I want to." He bought the building. Paid off Ethan's debts. Expanded the garage. But turned it into something more. Carter's Hope Center, a free therapy and repair center for disabled children. Families came from everywhere. Ethan taught posture therapy. Fixed wheelchairs. Helped kids stand. Helped parents believe again. On opening day, Sophie walked up to the microphone. No wheelchair. No fear. Just confidence. "This place helped me walk again," she said proudly. "And Mr. Ethan is my hero." The crowd cried. Ethan wiped his eyes. Margaret hugged him tightly. Richard shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for teaching me humility." Later that evening, Sophie ran into Ethan's arms. "I can run now," she laughed. He lifted her high. "You're amazing." "Will you always be my friend?" she asked. "Always," he smiled. And as the sun set over the once-forgotten garage, it stood transformed. Not by money, but by kindness, by patience, by love. A poor mechanic had done what wealth never could. He gave a child her life back.